Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Thursday 5 p.m. edition of Punch, Kick, Choke Chat. As always, we're so excited when you join us at our differing time schedules. It's just such a treat for us to be able to have different guests from different places who have different schedules, and you'll come with us as we accommodate them. It's a real honor for you to be here with us in real time. And if you're watching on YouTube, we stream live that way now, which is super cool. And if you're watching us live on Zoom, open up your other phone. But as we saw last week with Sensei Suino, you have to mute one or the other. They'll echo through each other. My name's Sean Benson. I'm one of your hosts. It's my incredible privilege to be a part of this show. And it's my incredible privilege every week to introduce Sensei Nicholas Suino. I always say the basics. It's not basic that he is an 8th Dan in Iaido, a 6th Dan in Jiu-Jitsu, a 6th Dan in Judo. It's the opposite of basic. I just mean that that's the fundamental ranks that make him a true master in these arts. But, you know, the one thing I was looking up to chat about with him today or about him, Sensei, I didn't know that you had done Kyudo. And the Eugen Herrigel book, Zen and the Art of Archery, it's one of my favorite books because the author's German, and in the 1920s, he'd been to Japan. And it's a very different perception of the different world, because of when he went, but also coming from that very Teutonic, I'm half German through my mother being from there, that very logical mindset. We've moved so far beyond the way he was seeing the world and what he was exposed to. But I wanted to just say, wow, I didn't know that. It's such an incredible thing to learn new things about you, even though we think we know all the basics. But how was the Kyudo, and how was your experience doing it versus his described in the book?
That's a great introduction, and you sort of reminded me of a chapter of life I had forgotten. I read that book when I was in college, in early college, and it's one of the things that inspired me to go to Japan. In fact, when I went to Japan, my goal was to study Kyudo and Judo, and I ended up in Iaido because my karate instructor suggested that I meet Yamaguchi Sensei, and I was just blown away by him. I met him at a seminar in this country, in Las Vegas. But my mission to go to Japan was to study Kyudo. And I did so. I studied for about 2.5 years and took a test for Shodan, passed my Shodan test. But at that point, I was studying Judo, Jiu-Jitsu, Iaido, going to seminars in other martial arts. And both my teachers and my body said, "You're doing enough. Time to take a break." I will tell you, there was nothing Zen about my experience in Kyudo. I suck Judo. And one of the reasons I sucked was because I was a 28-year-old dude full of myself. And so I went out and I bought the heaviest pull Kyudo bow that you can buy. I went to the store and I said, "Give me the heaviest one." And they're like, "You're stupid." And I said, no. I don't want to shoot one of those old lady bows where the arrow goes like this, right? I wanted my arrow to go straight. And so I had so many troubles. That arrow would hit me in the face. It would knock my glasses off. It'd pop off the bow. My arrows and glasses would fly in all directions. I leave that thing, I'm just pouring sweat. And the people that do Kyudo are the most elegant, refined people on the planet. They bow about 74 times to shoot one arrow. And, I'm meeting these beautiful Japanese women, well coiffed, and we would bow to each other, and the smell of, sandalwood would waft off of their kimonos, and I'm sitting there just, drenched in sweat, stuff all around me. So after I passed my test for Shodan, I'm like, that's enough punishment. I'm going to go do Iaido, where at least I'm better than, the bottom 3 people in the whole dojo.
That's awesome.
So I think Kyudo is amazing, but I'm not amazing at it.
Sensei Suino, I just want to say you're no different than any of the dudes. We all want our arrows to fly straight.
Fair enough. It falls to me each week to introduce Sensei Randy Dauphin, who most of you on this call know him well. Many of you maybe all of you have trained with him. I don't know if everybody has. 7th Dan in Shorin Karate and White Crane, 3rd Dan in Iaido. He has studied martial arts for a very, very long time. We've known each other, how long, Randy? 25 plus years?
Yeah, I want to say it's like we keep saying 20, we've said 25 years now for the last like 7 years. Right? So yeah, I think it's around 25 years. Yeah.
And the memories I have of training with you and Hanshi Legacy and you know, in the band shell in the park, at summer camp, in the Legacy Dojo above the convenience store, at the university, in a church, in a gym across the street from a cookie factory, which I will never forget because that smelled amazing. We have so many memories together. And what I will say is you will never outwork Randy in the martial arts or anywhere else. I'm just constantly impressed by how hard you train, how hard you work on your fitness. And because of what I know and talk to you about at work, it's pretty clear that how you do the martial arts is how you do work. And it's just so inspirational to see everything that you bring to the things that you do. So having said all that, great to see you, and take it away, man.
Thanks so much, Sensei. Yeah, the memories I have with the people on this call, Sean included, Sensei Legacy, yourself, that's just my life. Like, I'm just blessed to be living this life and have these people and be able to share these memories. You know, it's nice to be able to, you're in a room and something happens and I'm standing across the room and you're across the room, or Sensei Legacy's across the room. And when that thing happens, those are the two eyes that lock. You lock eyes with Sensei Legacy and you're like, oh my God, we're both thinking the same thing, right? Through these shared experiences. It's very interesting. And thank you very much for those memories. I wouldn't trade those memories for anything, for nothing. So every week, it's going to be a little different this week because Sensei Suino and Sensei Gage are very good longtime friends. And so I'm going to do an introduction and then I'm going to pass it back to Sensei Suino. Well, we're going to be punting it around for a minute here because I'm going to be changing things up just a little bit. Sensei Legacy, as everybody knows, and if you don't know, then you're going to know now. He is a 10th degree black belt, and Hanshi Anthony Sandoval was the one who awarded him that rank. And I know that he did because I was there the day that he did it. So I can attest to the fact that it happened. He's also a member of the Canadian Black Belt Hall of Fame. I know that as well because I was there when he did that. He's an author. I know that because I think I got the first copy of the book after he wrote it. He's also a student of Harold Warden, Benny Allen, Richard Kim, and he's still a student of Anthony Sandoval, and he's still a student of Sensei Suino's. The thing that I'm going to do today that is a little bit different is normally I share some story about Sensei Legacy from my memory, but I'm going to pass it over first to Sean and let Sean share something that maybe he wants people to know about Sensei Legacy from his perspective.
Thanks, Sensei. You know, this was such an easy thing for me to think about when you suggested that this would happen. You know, first off, I've shown this photo before and you have, but when I was looking at karate clubs and Taekwondo and Aikido and whatever, this photo, I looked at that and I just said, I don't know what's happening there, but it's so much deeper to me than everything I was presented at the other, not those martial arts, but those particular clubs. So I joined, and the first night I met Hanshi, I don't even know if I met him, but did the class at the demo. I just knew that I was going to be doing this for the rest of my life. And it was because of him, and it was because of how everybody respected and treated him. But I want to fast forward to the lowest period of my life. And two people on this call both took me into their homes. I was recovering, but hadn't yet crossed into sobriety from the darkest, deepest moment of my life through my addictions. And in particular, I remember showing up at Hanshi Legacy's door, and him and at the time Sensei Michelle took me in, and I slept on their couch for 2 weeks. I felt safer there than at my house because some of my parents' stuff, I had to set boundaries, but I was able to sleep on their couch. We did some martial arts, but for the most part, I just kind of felt safe and healthy. And when you have a sensei that you can show up at the lowest, darkest, unhealthiest point in your life, I always wanted to present strength and I got this and nothing will get me down, sensei. And I had to go, I'm not good. And to still be cradled and loved and then built up. Sensei Dauphin, by the way, did the same for me. But I just want to say that Hanshi Legacy, no matter what martial arts is, from like student to teacher, that's one of the greatest gifts anyone's ever given me, is that safety at a time when I didn't have any armor. So thank you. That's a memory that I want to share.
Sensei Suino?
What a great memory. And it's the wonderful contrast that I think we come back to a lot on these calls, which is that so many of the hardest warriors are also the kindest people. And I think that's missed by people who aren't martial artists. So I'll go back to a memory that I've already shared on this show of Hanchi Legacy. The first time we met was in Boston at an International Martial Arts Federation seminar. And it was a big deal in those days. I can't remember how many people. It was probably a couple hundred people at the seminar, a lot of high-ranking martial artists from the East Coast. And what I remember is there were a lot of politics going on, and a bunch of real tough, self-proclaimed badasses were running around the place in a panic because Hanchi Legacy was there. And I don't know what scared them, but I know they were all just really beside themselves about the idea that he would come into this association. They were terrified by it, and it was patent. And so I spent half the time training and the other half walking around the complex with these people, and they were bitching about Hanchi Legacy. Oh my God, he'll ruin IMAF if he comes in. And I'm like, come on, guys, settle down. So having this background, I walk into one of the gyms, and I step into the room, and on the far side of the room, Hanchi Legacy is there. And not only was everybody worried about him, he looked different than everybody else too. And I've said this before, he just emanated strength and calmness. He had a posture of somebody who had spent a lifetime in the martial arts, posture which he has today, relaxed, upright, competent. And there was just an air of, I know. Yeah. There was an air of seriousness about him that was completely lacking, on the part of any of the other martial artists in the room, no matter what their rank, and no matter what their self-proclaimed ability to kick ass was. So I'll never forget that. I love that story for myself because it's such a distinct memory. And that must have happened in like 1990. I mean, a long time ago. So really cool, rock and roll. Thanks for that memory.
Thanks, Sensei. If you want to hear me expound upon the virtues of Hanchi Legacy and Sensei Suino, I did a podcast recently. Sensei Suino did it as well, which is Lucas Kramer's podcast, The Road to Mastery. And if you go check that young man's podcast out, you'll hear some more information about Sensei Suino and Sensei Legacy if you so choose to do that. But now I'm going to say a few words about Sensei John Gage, who's our guest today. Sensei Gage started training at the University of Michigan in the Aikido Club at the age of 17. He beat me in by 1 year. I was 18 with Sensei Legacy at the University of Western Ontario. So we share that we ended up at universities to start our martial arts training. Sensei Gage is a 7th Dan, and he is the head and inheritor of the late Sato Sensei's Nihon Jujutsu system. And in addition, he's a 4th Dan in Judo, awarded by IMAF, the International Martial Arts Federation, and a 3rd Dan in Judo from the All Japan Judo Federation. He is a director at the International Martial Arts Federation and a chairman at the International Nihon Jujutsu Association. This is something so far, like when I read this, I'm like, in 1986, he moved to Japan, and he would remain there, live there, work there, learn there, teach there for almost 30 years. So all these other people who are, sorry, Sensei Suino, you're one of these other people, right? Like,
not serious.
I was there for 5 years, right? So, so Sensei Legacy would definitely say that Sensei Gage is not a quitter on Japan because he was there for 30 years. So, for me though, I've known Sensei Gage for a long time. One of the things when I started thinking about Sensei Gage, I thought about once I was teaching karate at JMAC, and Sensei Dan Holland said, Dan, when you move, it's eyes, feet, hands, eyes, feet, hands. I said, that's what Sensei Legacy always taught me. And he goes, that's really weird. Sensei Gage always says eyes, feet, hips, hands, right? Look, move your feet, then move your hips, and then move your hands. And I just thought, well, that's great that it's such a fundamental common thing that's part of my being. It was great to hear people say that. Another thing that's very common is that in Sensei Legacy's dojo, before I ever met these people, names like Wally Slokey, Billy Hine, Benny Allen, they've always been mentioned over and over again, and you almost feel like you knew them before you actually knew them. That's the same at JMAC. Whether I was at Itama or the Japanese Martial Arts Association Generation 1 or Generation 2, Sensei Gage's name was always mentioned by Sensei Suino in a way that I always felt like I knew him, even before I knew him. I've trained with him in karate and jujitsu and judo, and he's helped me with a lot of those different things. If you looked on Facebook today, I've talked with him, and I've even knelt in front of him with Sensei Suino. That was when I received my third Dan. He's introduced me to many, many great people. One of them that stands out in my mind is Sensei Alam Mashad. One of the things, it's funny, we were laughing about this before. One of the things about Sensei Gage is that this, in my mind, it's when visiting instructors from Japan come. So people like Yahagi Sensei or Nabetsu Sensei. Sensei Gage is tireless in that room at helping the rest of the group. And he helps the rest of the group in ways that we could not possibly help ourselves. Not only is he extremely intimate with the Japanese language, how to say things, but he's very intimate with why you say them and when you say them, and not the proper diction, but what the right time to do it. And we all benefit from those nuances when he's in the room. You can also tell a lot about a person by the way people talk about them when they're not there. And I've been in JMAC and heard Sensei Suino talk very highly. And I've heard Sensei Dan Holland and people like John Spangler and Beth and Tim just gush at how much they respect Sensei Gage and how much he helps them and how skilled and nice a person he is. So I guess before I send it back to Sensei Suino, I want to say that, you know, I think Sensei Gage is very skilled. I think he's a very humble person. I think he's very intelligent. I think he's very, very approachable and helpful. And because of those reasons, I'm always going to be excited when I walk into any room and see Sensei Gage there. And I'm super excited about him being here tonight. And so that's my introduction. I'm going to pass it back to Sensei Suino, who, as we all know, is a longtime friend.
Thank you.
And I'm not going to go on it at too great a length. I could easily talk all night about Gage-Sensei because he is indeed one of my oldest friends. When I set foot at the Asian Martial Arts Studio, I think in 1979, Gage-Sensei was already training there. And we soon became training partners, spent a lot of time together. And I would say we were friends and compatriots there, but we became much better friends during the time I lived in Japan when he helped me get my feet on the ground. And we spent many, many hours together. I think the hallmark of our training together was almost every Saturday, we would go early to the Embassy Judo Club. Together, we would teach kids judo. Then we would stay for adult Nihon Jujutsu. And then we would stay for adult judo. Then we would go have a lunch with Sato Sensei. And then Gage Sensei and I would go back to the dojo and train between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 more hours and leave when it was dark out and go to the bar and get hammered. I will never forget those days. They were long, exhausting days, but man, were they fun. And I just consolidated so many skills there. That was a forging of the sword in so many ways. We trained together endlessly. Often the next day we would get up hungover and go out to Sato Sensei's house, which was IMAF headquarters, and put in several hours doing paperwork, which was a trial in and of itself. But Gage Sensei has a family. He realized that it was very difficult to raise a family in Tokyo. He moved back to the US, and I encouraged him, and I think, of course, it was his decision to come back to Ann Arbor. And as well, now that he lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan again, and is raising his family here, it's been an opportunity for him to come into JMAC and contribute there. And so one of his key activities now is that he teaches several of our most advanced students we're trying to make sure that they have a very high quality education in Nihon Jujutsu and Judo. And Gage-Sensei is in charge of that process. And so, you know, he has the run of the dojo on Tuesday nights, and he's making that happen. So contributing to my education in 1979 at the Asian Martial Arts Studio, contributing to the legacy of JMAC in 2021. And I think we'll hear a lot more about all those things over the next hour and 10, 20 minutes. So having said all that, I want to hand it back to Sean, who is going to start us up on our housekeeping stuff. I'm really excited about the next few minutes.
Thank you.
Sean, you're muted, sir.
You're muted, Sean. Sorry, unmute Sean.
Thank you. I had a big cough and I muted myself and I didn't realize I couldn't unmute myself. I thought it was better not to cough over that incredible introduction. I'm so excited about this interview tonight. A couple of housekeeping things before we jump right into it. You're watching 5 adults talk on the screen. There might be some language. There might be references to things you don't like. If so, I have the Disney Channel and I just watched Frozen. I think it's a good movie. You can go watch that instead. Otherwise, stick with us because you're going to hear something probably better than even Let It Go, and that's a great song, but this is better. I just want to mention our sponsor we're happy to have one. This is Don Warner from warnerentertainment.com, WARRENER entertainment.com, and we're proud to be one of the sponsors of Punch Kick Choke Chat. We encourage you to visit our website at warnerentertainment.com. Get your free copy of Warriors Magazine today. Over 2,500 items, including books, DVDs, downloads, rare posters, lots more, featuring some of the biggest names in the martial arts: Shotokan's Hirokazu Kanazawa, Goju-Ryu's Chuck Merriman, Ninja Stephen Hayes, legendary Joe Louis. That's just the beginning. That's warnerentertainment.com. Thanks for listening and keep smiling. And the other thing I just want to say is that at the bottom, we have our chat button. This is where it gets really fun. You've logged in real time. It's an amazing thing that you're here with us as we have this interview, and we want you to be part of the living history we're creating with Punch Kick Choke Chat. So thread your questions in, and if you've been watching lately, you know we moved the 10 questions up, which means if you don't get your questions in sooner than later, there's a good chance we won't get to them, and we do look forward to those. I'm going to kick things off the way I normally do, but I do want to say that so much of this show, we've mentioned the idea of sitting in the back seat of a car while 2 seniors are speaking in shotgun and driving. And tonight, especially with Sensei Suino's relationship with Gage-Sensei, I know that we're going to hear a lot more from him as a host. But I do want to start, as I always do, Sensei. It's such an honor and pleasure to have you here. What made you walk into that first dojo? What led up to that, and what kept you there?
That's a wonderful question. Thank you. And thank you everyone for the introduction, and welcome to all our guests, everyone who's attending. This is a great honor to be here, and I'm really looking forward to it. And on to questions. I was really interested in Asian culture from an early age. And at a certain stage, I'm going to think it was, middle school, I discovered that the Japanese history is really interested, and it's also compact. If you start looking at other cultures, China, Cambodia, what have you, they have super long histories that are very complex, and you can't comprehensively study them. People end up specializing in little areas. Whereas the Japanese have more or less a straight lineage for the last X thousand years. Mm. And so it's possible to sort of have a comprehensive overview, and that was attractive to me. Which led me to, at an early age, being fascinated by Kurosawa movies and such samurai paraphernalia. And I had fenced for about 3 years at the local YMCA. And the Simon, who was the coach, returned to the UK, and that was the end of the program. And so I went in search of Kendo. And in my community, there was nothing available. So having done my homework, someone suggested that the Yoshinkai Kushida Sensei was teaching Aikido, and they use wooden swords. And so I thought, well, that sounds like a good compromise. I studied Kushida Sensei for about 1.5 years at the university. And about a year into that, a friend introduced me to the Asian Martial Arts Studio. and where they had a different style of Aikido training. About 6 months of that went by, and I just decided I couldn't do both because they were too different, and I was too confused, and I was too new. But those are the circumstances of how I joined. Why did I stay? It was fascinating. It was like a dream come true. I had studied about Japanese history, and here I was virtually living it. The other thing that strikes me as interesting is it was a difficult time in my life as well. And the training gave me the stability and the camaraderie in a healthy environment that I really needed. And I didn't even know it at the time, but it just was a benefit that I didn't need. It's like broccoli, you know, you don't think you need broccoli, but you really do. So this was an opportunity for me to get my vegetables and to live well in a safe and healthy environment. And so that was why I stuck with it on sort of a deeper level. But on an immediate level, I had great people to train with. Suino Sensei, for example, many others. The training was really challenging, and it was a place to focus my energy and to build up my perseverance, my endurance, my strength, and both emotional and physical. And it just was exactly what I needed at the time.
And when did you two first encounter one another then?
79, I think it was.
Oh, so long before the actual training, or was that in the dojo?
That was in the dojo. You have to realize that when I was 17, it was like 1903.
And what do you remember about clocking each other?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Suino Sensei, but hadn't you started initially in the karate program?
Yes.
And that was, at this particular dojo, really their forte. And Aikido was a newer program that they were actually building. And so that's where I was. So we literally trained in rooms side by side often. And then at some point, because cross training was emphasized in this club, Suino Sensei joined the karate, or the Aikido, or I joined the karate. I don't remember which it was, or both, probably both. And then we started to hang out and spend training time and not so much social time after, you know, at that point. We really began socializing in Tokyo. I mean, we had some friendship time, but not a lot in Ann Arbor.
Mm-hmm. And what precipitated the change? I believe it was 2 years after you started into judo. Is that correct?
I had always wanted to. Okay, I'm going to put this on the table, and please don't be offended, anyone. But I believe that Aikido is incomplete. I believe that judo is incomplete. They are both fantastic training systems, but they are two halves of a complete system. Because in judo you have no striking, and in Aikido you have no competition. So you need the elements of both. And so I was fortunate enough to have exposure to judo at this club, and we visited other places for more training. But that's what led me to going to Japan, because my training from my I believe that my training was not all that it could be, and I wanted to really get to the source and train with the very best.
So you're just busting ass, and one day you go, "This is good, but it's not quite it. I got to go to Japan." Period.
Yeah, that's a really great way to say it. It took a little longer than that, but yes, that was the idea.
Sure. So I am gonna do a really simple thing here, and I just like to throw it to you, Sensei Suino, to guide us through taking you to Japan and your experiences there, because I know the questions you can ask will take us down a much more interesting road than what I would ask.
Yeah, I can ask a few questions about that and tee up some stuff. Let me say this. After I had been in Japan for 3-4 months, Gage-Sensei and I had been hanging out together. We've been training together. One day we had finished training for some reason uncharacteristically early. I think it was a Saturday, and we were on our way to we were going to try a new restaurant. So we get on the train, and on the way, Gage-Sensei goes, hey, let's stop at this station. I want to show it to you. It's the station where I first set foot in Tokyo. Gage-Sensei, I don't know if you remember what train station that was. Was it
Ueno Station.
Ueno Station.
Yeah.
And we get out to the station, we walk to the edge of this, one of the platforms, and we look out the window onto, you know, kind of the city of Ueno. And Gage-Sensei says, I stood here with a few dollars in my pocket, no Japanese, no friends, no prospects. All I had was a letter of introduction to Sato Sensei. And he just described this moment of like touching down in Japan and going, holy shit, what did I just do? Right? It like left the whole world behind. And I could feel that I didn't have to go through that because he was already there for me, and he really guided me through a lot of stuff. But I can only imagine, you know, age in 86, that would have been what, you'd have been 24, 25. 25. And I remember that so fondly, but then I remember how much Gage-Sensei helped me. We got on the phone when I was in Japan, and I said, you know, hey, let's get together and train. And he goes, okay, well, Saturday mornings, it's Embassy Judo Club. And here is the station you need to get out at. Here's the place you got to walk to. Here's the place you're going to cross. Here's the police box if you get lost. You know, come to the embassy. And by the way, they're going to check your passports on the way into the embassy compound. You know, so my experience was completely different. I had a lot of hand holding, and it was still terrifying, but it really helped.
Hey, Sensei Gage, do you have what Sensei Suino is describing reminds me of stories from a lot of people who are immigrants to other countries, and it's occurring to me that you were basically an American immigrant showing up in Japan with nothing, trying to make your way.
That's precisely it. And Suino Sensei described it eloquently, as he always does. I arrived at Ueno Station where 1 million people a day travel through. And I'd just gotten off a 16-hour flight in a direction that I'd never been. And I had one small piece of luggage and a letter. And when I arrived at Ueno Station, because I hadn't prepared, I just got on an airplane and went. When I arrived at Ueno Station, there are literally 22 platforms side by side for trains to travel through. And when you come down from the platform and through the ticket wicket, you're in something that is the size of what is an enormous stadium type of thing on World Cup Day, because that's the number of people who are traveling through there all the time. And I didn't have any place to stay. I didn't know where I was going. So I saw a sign that said exit. I could read a little Japanese. And I went out, and I was on the street in the middle of concrete Tokyo, and looked around and didn't know what to do. I was ready to give up. I was ready to get back on the train, if I could find it, go back to the airport and go home. I'm walking down the street, and I saw Business Hotel, which is a really low price, you know, moderately, sort of like a motel, but in a city. And I rent a room for a night, and I go upstairs, and the room is wide enough to stand next to the bed, which is an extra small bed. And the bed is just as long as from your heel to the top of your head, and that's it. And there's a little TV at the end of the bed, like where your feet, just above your feet, that takes 100 yen coins. That's like about $1. So having passed a beer machine on the way through the lobby, I went downstairs, I bought some cans of beer, brought them up to the room, had some extra 100 yen coins, started putting coins in the machine, the TV, a little screen about this big. And everything was like weird Japanese TV, and I couldn't relate to it, except it was the autumn sumo tournament. And that night, Konishiki, who weighed in at 435 pounds, one of the largest wrestlers of all time, was fighting one of my heroes, who is named Chiyo no Fuji, who was about 210 pounds. He looks like Suino Sensei, just a bit taller. He's got that sort of bulky, muscular body. And So Konishiki, who is like, I don't know, 1.5 meters wide, maybe 2 meters wide. He's enormous. And then there's this little Chiyono Fuji. And I'm sitting there depressed. And I thought, oh, this is great. Now the big fat guy's going to squish the little guy and my life's going to end. Instead, what happened was Chiyono Fuji moved forward for a moment and then turned to the side. And Konishiki, who once the momentum started, couldn't stop, literally fell onto his belly because his feet couldn't keep up with it. And that was the moment, literally. This is 100 years ago, and I still remember it vividly, when I thought, yes, I can do this. And the next morning I woke up and called Sato Sensei, and he invited me to train at his dojo the following Saturday. It was 2 days later. And I started training with him, and 30 years later, I got dragged back on that airplane, and now I'm in North America again.
So talk to us about finding Sato, about finding your way through the city until you got there, and how that bloomed into 30 years.
You remember earlier, a few minutes ago, Suino Sensei mentioned that endurance and how did you describe it? This ability to put up with things is a critical component of your relationship with Sato Sensei, who is a very, very old school, traditional Japanese teacher who didn't explain much at all. I called him on the phone and he said, yes, come to the dojo on Saturday. Here's the address. So I found it. In fact, the day before, I went and found the dojo so I wouldn't get stuck. And so I showed up and I had a red tie and a white shirt and a blue blazer because that's what you do. And he made me sit on a chair and watch people train all morning. He wouldn't let me do anything. And then he said, okay, you're coming with me. And we got in his car, and an hour and a half later, we got to his house. And he made me sit on a sofa that Legacy Sensei appears similar to what you're sitting on. I was really struck by that when I saw your picture come live. And then he put on Japanese fairy tale videos in Japanese that are some of my favorites now. And he said, sit here. And his wife brought me a coffee. And I sat there for 2 hours. He was someplace else doing whatever. Then we had dinner together, and that was very nice. Dinner's, an hour and a half of the wife bringing food out and eating amazing things. It was brilliant. I don't think I'd eaten in 3 days at the time. And then he said, okay, I'll take you to the train station. You can be my student. Come on these days at these times. And he put me on a train, and an hour and a half later, I ended up back at the hotel.
So what is that? I don't want to be long about this, but I went to meet Sensei Ikehara, and he sat me in front of a DVD player, told me he wouldn't train with me. And once I watched enough videos, he came up and said, okay, I'll train with you. I'm not kidding. It was shorter, but similar. What's that? Is it a rite of passage? Is it to see if you'll engage with things other than what you want? What is that cultural aspect?
Culturally, it's something I don't understand. It's just one of those things that you accept.
Right.
There's a place and a time for asking questions. There's a place and a time for accepting your fate. And when you're sitting on the sofa and Sensei tells you to watch videos, acceptance is what is necessary.
I had a similar experience, only I enjoyed mine because Sensei Legacy made me watch a Montreal Canadiens hockey game.
Oh, that's a much better choice. Much, much better. Yes.
So as you enter this world, and again, I'd love if Sensei Suino digs in as much as you like, Sensei. The name Sato Sensei, I've heard from Sensei Suino for a long time. What was so legendarily tough, endurable that you needed that endurance for? What was the training regimens like in a way that was so intense, but also what made you go, oh, I can't be here for a short period of time?
That's a very deep question that I'm going to have to unpack a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Briefly, Sato Sensei was of the very old school, and it's that you do what you're told and you do it infinite number of times, and then eventually you may understand it in a nutshell. And he was part of a large federation that we know as called IMAF, that at the time of the 1964 Olympics was full of virtually all of the big names in the martial arts in Japan. After that period, when the economy in Japan took off, people started their own organizations. But at that particular time, everybody was in it, was in IMAF. And Sato Sensei was a minor secretary at the time. He stayed with it and he became one of the senior people as time went by. So the people who are still in IMAF have, like Yamaguchi Sensei, they are all people who've trained for 50, 60, 70 years. They lived through the hard times. They were really tough. Many of them are incredibly kind. They're wonderful people. They were wonderful people. Most of them have passed now. But they all lived in fear of Sato Sensei. And I remember a couple of times Yamaguchi Sensei saying to me personally, man, it must be really tough, your training. And so, you know, this is people who have greater sensibilities than I, who have decided that this is the case, so I simply believe them. On a practical sense, Sato Sensei was extremely exacting, and I think this is not unusual, but it helped one to do absolutely one's best. And so there was always this expectation waiting in the background to say, okay, I have to excel, which means I have to put in another 20 hours this week of training. And then when I show up on Saturday, I have to be my very best. One of the, colorful stories that come from that time, Suino Sensei and I had gone to the Yoshinkan Hombu in Shinjuku, which is a major part of Tokyo, for an exhibition of very senior people. An example of how senior Gogen the Cat Yamaguchi was there. By this time he was old, he was in a wheelchair, but these were the sort of level of dignitaries who were there. Sato Sensei was the first exhibition was by Shioda Sensei of the Yoshinkan, who was just this amazing man. He was incredible. And so he beat up his guys for 10 minutes, and when they couldn't get off the ground anymore, said, okay, we're done. Sato Sensei was next. And so he beat me up for less time because there's only one of me and I couldn't get up sooner. And then Otsuka Sensei of the Wadoryu was next. And for whatever reason, his students hadn't shown up. They're probably dead the next day, but they didn't show up because he used me. So he beat me up for a while. Now, this is a long time. We're really talking probably 25, 30 minutes by the time this has all gone by. Meanwhile, Suino Sensei is sitting in Seiza on a hardwood floor without moving. Later, I came to understand it's because his legs had fallen asleep and they wouldn't move, but that's another story. So the last person to demonstrate that day was Yamaguchi Sensei, and he didn't have any students there. He was going to do a solo, EI practice exhibition. And I'm standing there and I'm thinking Yamaguchi Sensei is going to use me for his demonstration like the other guys did. And I thought, oh, this is not going to end well, but this is my job. I have to do it. And he looked at me, he picked up his sword and he stood up, he looked at me and he said, like, get out of here, son. So I got to go sit on the hardwood floor with Suino Sensei.
Sensei Dauphin, I want to throw this to you.
Yeah, you know, Sensei Gage, we're getting this image of Sato Sensei as a real hard ass, which I think he might have been, right? Like if Yamaguchi Sensei is saying to you, your training must be very hard, it must be very hard. But in my mind, I've always thought having senseis with high standards that make you have expectations and meet those expectations, that's a good thing, I think. I think you would agree with that. My question, though, is more around, did your relationship just stay that way, the same way it was watching videos on the TV like day one? Or was there any chinks in the armor where, Did he ever put his arm around you and say, good job? He must have, because you inherited his system. But how did the relationship grow?
Boy, that is a wonderful question. Thank you. Yes, the relationship grew tremendously. He was, for me, really like a second father. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience to train with him for many years. And I learned a tremendous amount from him. He never put his arm around me because that's not who he was.
Mm.
He was really old school Japanese. He hit me, he threw me down, he twisted my parts, he choked me out, he did all the training contact. That was fine. But there's such a reserve. He was such a reserved man that he really didn't show that sort of physical affection. He was very kind. He was the kindest person, you know, you'll ever meet. But there's also a very hard side to him. I was there towards the end of his life, in fact, at the end of his life, and he became very soft and kind at that point.
Mm.
But in terms of affectionate contact, shaking his hand is the most I ever did. But again, he was of a different generation. Old Japanese guys like that, they didn't. So it's a cultural difference.
So I want to pop in a question here before we do our 10 questions. And maybe I'll start with you, Sensei Suino, and then come back to you, Sensei Gage, Sensei Sato. You didn't get the name as well. But no, I do. You've brought up something that has only dawned on me for the first time for all the people we've interviewed. And that's that many of these men you were training with, if not all of them at that time, had been through and recovered from World War II. And I'm wondering how much of that, we'll start with you, Sensei Suino, like, did you feel that? Was that a part of the psychology? Is that anything you've clocked? I mean, that's a huge thing.
Well, I think Gage Sensei and I both experienced, you know, some what I'll call very mild, I mean, what these days they'd call racist tendencies. I don't think we identified them that way in those days. It was very clear that we were not Japanese, right? And people of the same generation as Sato Sensei were often pretty severe in those views, and you would get the brunt of it sometimes at night, coming home late on the subway, if you happen to, you know, sit too close to a drunk Japanese guy from that era, right? Where I noticed it, you know, specifically in detail was my sword teacher, Yamaguchi Sensei, was a captain in the Japanese military, and he was in Manchuria. And he wouldn't talk about his specific experiences, but he carried a sword he carried a sword in war when the Japanese occupied Manchuria, and that tells you, I mean, and this is a guy who teaches Iaido for personal development. But this is an echo I will probably bore you with to tears. One of the hardest men you'll know, and one of the most kind men you'll ever meet as well.
Gage Sensei, your thoughts on that idea, or the fallout or cultural echoes?
Well, I'd like to begin with seconding what Suino Sensei said about Yamaguchi Sensei. He was absolutely all of the above. He was incredibly generous, and yet his spine was steel. Absolutely no question about it. From a training perspective, the people of that generation really believed in that which does not kill you makes you stronger. And those who die, well, that's how it is. So there was a really hard side to the way they were, you know, brought up. And that played out in the dojo for some of them. For others, they kept it, you know, locked away. But there is still this idea that is, what do you say? Shioda Sensei was someone I knew perhaps best, who really embodied this. He was in Southeast Asia in the Japanese Army. I don't know what his job was. And I don't know anything about, how his service, only that he was repatriated. And he really believed when he was young that, the cost of failure is infinite. And he would just take out people. And if they couldn't take it, they should leave. Because it's in sort of an evolutionary process. If you can't cut it, then, stand aside. Next person. And their underlying, their training really has a lot of that. It's this Robert Mustard Sensei, his training, he was in the stuff where they train the Japanese Imperial Guard and what we call SWAT team. Those guys go to that dojo and do 6 hours a day training. And if they survive, then they become the instructors for the Tokyo Metropolitan Police.
Yeah.
And it's incredible stuff. So yeah, there is this underlying philosophy. There's also a certain amount of this xenophobia, this racism. Overall, I would say that there's less in judo and probably more in the sword arts. The sword arts, whether it's kendo or iai or what have you, they have sort of a often inflated self-opinion because they're doing the arts of the samurai, where judo guys are like, wrestlers who should be working as bouncers or something. There's a real difference of opinion. It's not universal, but it's fairly common.
Thanks for that, senseis. I find that so fascinating, especially because these are martial arts. And when you're talking about these men who carried swords in war, I imagine that you can feel a bit of that emanate out. It's time for our 10 questions, Sensei Gage. These are the questions we ask all of our guests. And the fun of it is answering as impulsively as you can and then expanding as needed. So the first of the 10 questions is, what is the most effective move in your martial arts arsenal?
Awareness. Do you want a single word answer? Do you want me to
Up to you. I like the idea of answering impulsively and then maybe going from there or not going from there. It's totally up to you, Sensei.
Well, I think we all understand this, that awareness is a multifaceted, situation. If you want to talk about self-defense, then you have to be aware of your environment. If you're in the middle of training, you have to be aware of your opponent's movement and in order to adapt and find opportunities or react in a way that is most indicated. So awareness, I think, is a broad term, but if you want to talk about a single tool, the best tool you have is that.
Who is the most influential martial artist in your life?
Oh, I would have to say Sato Shizuya Sensei.
Who do you believe to be the most influential martial artist of all time and why?
I'm sorry, I don't mean to duck this question, but I'm really not the person to ask. I know very little about martial arts in North America or Europe in the sense of who the people are, who are the leaders. Historically, it's difficult to say. I mean, some people might say, Musashi was a great influence, but that is going to take a whole nother day to talk about, a whole nother show. So I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for that.
What excites you most about the next 5 years of your training?
Well, the first is to be able to train. First and foremost, to be in the dojo with my colleagues, with my friends, and be able to actually train. And then the next thing I would say is we at JMAC, thanks to Suino Sensei's incredible leadership and dedication, we have a phenomenal group of people, not just in the dojo, but among our friends. And the opportunity for some of the younger students to grow and mature and realize their potential. And also for some of the, middle level managers to move into the C-suite. That's all good stuff. I'm really excited. We have some incredible people who's, again, Suino Sensei has brought them up, and now they are like springtime flowering. It's brilliant. It's not about me, it's about them.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you get there?
I'm going to have to pass on that question. I'm not a believer.
Do you have a favorite film and television martial artist?
Toshiro Mifune. Would have to be, but
In my head, I was saying, I hope he says Toshiro Mifune. I hope he says
But I have seen a couple of Green Hornet, old Green Hornet episodes. And what was his name? Sorry. Bruce Lee.
Bruce Lee.
I was thinking Jackie Chan. I knew that was wrong. Bruce Lee was phenomenal. He moved in a way that's just, oh my God, just incredible. Yes.
What martial artist, living or dead, in all through time through history, would you like to train with the most?
What do you think, Suino Sensei?
Well, I'm a passionate fanboy of Yamaoka Teshu. He's the guy for me. But part of that's out of the sword world. I think you may have a slightly different perspective on it.
I'll take that. I would take that.
This is the first phone a friend we've ever had.
Yeah.
First time we've ever had phone a friend.
Well, my thinking is that there are lots of people I would like to have trained with in Japan. There are lots of people in Europe and North America who I'd like to train, but I don't know who they are. And historically, it's not my concept to think about that, because I try to be more practical in these ways. And let me just give you a little background on that. How many of you have driven and maintained a car from the 1950s or 60s? I had a yes, okay, so it's a very different thing. They were cool. I had a 1966 Chevrolet. It was a Caprice. It was a two-door. It had an enormous engine. It was one of the most beautiful cars ever. It cost so much money and time to maintain. I had to end up selling it because I couldn't afford to keep it. It was as big as a house. It was all kinds of things. Yes, it was gorgeous, but my Subaru is so much a better car now. I turn the key and it starts. I put gas in it, it goes. I take it to the shop once a year. They do whatever they do, and then it drives perfectly every day. So my feeling for historical training is it was appropriate at the time and it was unquestionably awesome. But the training we do today has evolved. We don't have distributor caps and points anymore for a reason. Now, that's not universally true, I'm sure. But if we look at the judo world, there are people who have created these amazing techniques. We lost one recently. He was phenomenal at the Shioda throw. He could do it 5 different ways on both sides against people who are any size. And in the past, there were great people, sure, but there were also a lot of people who got broken knees. a different Sato Sensei tells a story of a particular throw called hanegoshi. Hane is like the wing of a bird. It moves up like this, and that is you use to carry someone's leg and you throw them with it. If you look up Hane, H-N-E-G-O-S-I, hanegoshi, on YouTube, you can find a million examples. But Sato Sensei said, a different Sato Sensei, Sato Tariuki Sensei, said that a lot of people started practicing this because they had gotten their knees broken during early judo training. And that means that your leg is kind of not straight anymore. So it was basically bent in a position where that technique happens naturally. So that's how it became popular. Is that true? Is it urban myth? I'm not 100% sure. But I can say that in the old days, injuries were rampant in the judo world. And it was, again, the same idea. If you can't cut it, hit the road. So historically, I'm sure there were great things. I don't doubt that at all, but there were not only good things, right?
If everyone in the world could have the greatest benefit you've gotten from martial arts, what would you bestow upon them?
There is a proverb from Kano Jigoro, who founded judo. He was an educator and he was a brilliant man. And he has a motto that I believe would benefit mankind, all mankind, infinitely. That is also hanging in the dojo. It's mutual benefit and welfare in all things. There's another component to this that says maximum efficiency. And I think this has implications of not necessarily what everyone needs, but mutual benefit and welfare in all things, I believe, would allow us to take care of ourselves and take care of those with whom we are close, and would also give us an opportunity to reach out to those in need, because it's everyone's benefit. I don't need a mountain of gold. That's just my opinion. So why shouldn't I pass it out to the people who don't have enough? That's one interpretation of what it means. I'm not advocating a welfare state or what have you. Don't get in trouble politically. But if we basically thought about the other person, similar to the Christian ethic, do unto others as they would have you do unto you. This is a primary underlying philosophical tenet of judo.
Greatest achievement, greatest regret.
Greatest achievement would be 3 children. They're all wonderful and a total pain. And greatest regret, I didn't get to be 6'2" and good looking like my cousins.
Thanks for all those answers. That's really wonderful. We love this, the logging we get to do of everybody's perspective on these questions. Sensei Dauphin, I want to throw it to you for the question you want to guide Sensei Gage to.
Sensei Gage, I want you to know that since you, I, Robert, and Sensei Suino talked, you had brought up a topic that has just really been rattling around in my brain. Like I've been thinking about it nonstop since we talked about it. And it was this idea of grading. And I'm not going to be able to articulate it as well as you did, but I wondered if you wanted to crack that open. I think Sensei Legacy would be interested to hear that and probably have some thoughts on it, and be just nice for everybody to kind of contribute on that since you were curious about it.
Great, thank you. Leading up to this opportunity, this chat here, I was thinking about a whole range of things, trying to prepare, and that led me to consider consider my practice and some of the things that we do in a fresh way. And one of the things that I have been somewhat unsure about or basically, I would like to reach out to others and discuss what your thoughts are and experience has been with exams. Now, in the West and in most of modern life, when I decide to go to medical school or law school, become an engineer, become a mechanic, I set my goals and I prepare and I choose to take the exams. I take an entrance exam or a qualifying exam. But this is all inspired by my motivation, perhaps influence from others, maybe your friends or parents or what have you, encourage you, but you have to step up to the plate. The burden is on the individual who will be taking the initiative and deriving, presumably, the benefit. However, in the martial arts, our testing regimen is that the senior people select those who are ready and then tell them, inform them, request that they join the grading. I'm not sure I have a single question here, but I wonder, is there a place, any way for us to meet people's norms that they have experienced in their life by allowing them to step up to the plate and say, I want to do this? Or is that function met in regular training, simply getting to the dojo and doing the hard work, and exams are something special and outside of that sphere? I hope I framed that with some clarity.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting topic, Sensei Gage, especially when you compare what we do today versus what was done in history and what's lingered from history. It crosses so many boundaries, like cultural boundaries, historic boundaries, modern. So I don't know, is there anybody in particular, Sensei Gage, that you want to first talk about that? Or
yes, Legacy Sensei, you have more experience than any of us and a different cultural perspective than mine. I was really thinking about pointing this question at you to begin with. Would you mind?
No, if I understand properly, there are two things that happen in my life. Is that not to belittle yourself, you have to give yourself to the art and to the sensei. So I think that's hard sometimes for people to let other people lead them and be completely confident. In other words, it's like, somebody standing beside you and you going backwards and trusting your friend's going to catch you. And in return, the sensei will give you a part of himself that he got from his sensei and his sensei got from his sensei. And that's what I did. I was uneducated, right from the streets. How did I end up in martial arts? How did this? Of course, you're attracted by the fighting and that other stuff. But once I got in there, it was the loyalty and the giving of yourself to the art. That is the only way you're going to get it back. I don't care if you're in karate for 50 years, but you don't do that. Martial arts will not release its secrets to you. You are not 100% of pure mind about the art.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to do that, you need a classical sensei. I've always said, Matty Allen gave, Benny Allen is not an Oriental gentleman, but a very noted martial artist. He gave me a part of himself. It shows in my school, but they're not just going to give it to anyone. You have to be someone who actually cares about martial arts. Like all of us. That's obvious. We find that to be something just, well, that's small, but it's not.
Sensei Gage, somebody else on the call? Do you want to?
Well, let me make one quick observation, if I may. If I'm hearing you properly, Legacy Sensei, if I go to get my qualification as a master mechanic, that's something that I'm putting in the effort and getting the training, and I'm expecting, let's say, income and stability from that. It's a very self-centered, in other words, I'm taking care of myself. And to some extent, we could say this is being done in isolation. I may be part of a class, but it's all about me. However, if I heard you properly, you're saying that the dedication to the art and your community has to come first, and that's how you eventually may receive this gift. Is that inaccurate?
I believe that's it. So you were speaking of a mechanic, some
Right.
guy can go in there and not really study and do his job and not really know all the ins and outs of being a mechanic. He gets out on the job, and that's highly noticeable. He won't have his job very long. It's the same in the arts. It'll chew you up and spit you out in the street where you came from.
Interesting. Interesting. Thank you. Would anyone else like to take a stab at this one?
I'd love to hear what Randy has to say on it.
What I have to say won't be much different than what Sensei Legacy just said. For me, I think if you want to be a brain surgeon or you want to be a mechanic, there's an end goal for that. The end goal is being able to open somebody's head up and fix them. That's a very good goal. And you should be sticking with that, and you should be learning more as you go, right? But at least this is only my opinion, Sensei Gage. My opinion is, for me, the goal is to stay on the path, right? The goal is not to achieve something, at least not at this point. Like, it's not like, my goal isn't, I have to be an 8th Dan by this day because there's some necessity for me to be an 8th Dan on this day for me to, my goal is to keep coming here and keep learning and making incremental progress on this path that I'm on. And yes, to lean on what Sensei Legacy just said, you need a guide and you need a teacher and you need a person who won't be in the same spot. When I get there, they'll have moved on. So I have to, whereas I think in some of the other things, it's, more prove yourself as good as the person who's teaching you, and then you can go do it. Right. And so that's why you go after the test. That's why you say, I want to be tested. I feel like I'm now ready to go fix cars or cut people's heads open and fix them, whatever that, and I've proven that I can. And whereas here, the proof is just in coming every day and doing it every day and helping people every day and learning from your sensei every day. And then the test just kind of comes surprisingly. And Sean and I were talking about this. And then really the goal, what is the goal of the test? For me, the goal of the test is just to feel really proud and privileged that these people that I really look up to and respect are looking at me and saying, you know what, in my eyes, you're slightly different. You've achieved something slightly different than the other people that came here. I've given you something, you've taken it and you've used it or moved it forward in a way that's slightly different than the other people. So I don't know.
Thank you.
I don't know if that's right. That's my thoughts, but I've had some time to collect my thoughts since you talked to us.
Great.
I'm going to go to one of the questions from our guests, but I will briefly add, because it's not prevalent in those other areas of society, that's why I need it from this. It balances out, because I do have that. I'm going to go get this degree. I'm going to go do this thing. And this is like, and you even said it, and I wrote it down, be able to train. When you said that about your next 5 years, that's what I hope to do in my next 5 years. Stay injury-free, train as much as possible. And it took me a long time to get there because of the way my senseis are talking about this. So yeah, for me, if it were out there, I might not have needed this as much. Sensei Dova?
I just think Sensei Legacy has something maybe that he wanted to say or add. I could just tell from looking at him.
I have a question, but it's completely different.
That's fine.
Let's go there.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different than the heavy talking. I sort of just want to talk about the Canadian, North American culture and the Japanese culture, because you've lived there so long. A lot of times people try to pull martial arts in different directions. I have a title of professor, and Master Kim wanted to move everything into a guy with my Dan being called a doctor. I'm just wondering, like over here, we look at the Japanese persons with much respect, they wear cowboy hats, and they like our culture over here. They dress like Elvis, they like that stuff. In Japan and Okinawa, how does the public look at martial artists? Do they look at them like doctors, or just this guy, like in North America, you gain a reputation for being a good fighter, and it's not quite like being a priest or something. What view is the Japanese culture look at its own martial arts?
I think that it is, for people who are involved in the martial arts and are aware of the martial arts, they have a great deal of respect for people who put in the effort to train, and then eventually for those who excel and reach high grades. There are an awful lot of people in Japan who don't know anything about the martial arts, and I'm assuming Okinawa is the same. So it's sort of a niche area. If you are familiar with it, then it's often an important part of your life, and you respect it and admire the people who are exponents. But for the general Japanese person, they really don't know much about it.
So in relation to that, they really don't lean back on the samurai idea.
Boy, that is a difficult question. I think there's a component of their national myth that includes the ideals of the samurai, the selfless dedication, the endless endurance, the being strong. But there's another side to what do you say? The martial arts, for some people, represent a militarism that they do not welcome, and that they would prefer never to have Japan return to.
It was a bit brutal.
Absolutely. And so for a certain percentage of the population, whether it's 5% or 30%, I have no idea, but they associate the martial arts with militarism and the horrors of the Pacific War, the Second World War. And they have absolutely no interest and no patience with it.
Really too bad, in a way.
Sensei Gage, did you read a book by Katsuo Ishiguro, An Artist of the Floating World? Have you read that?
I think I have a long time ago. Why?
It touches on those very themes of the generational difference between that. Essentially what the question was it digs very much into that. We don't ever want to go back to that, or I can't believe that we're changing away from that. And that nationalistic idea. It's one of my favorite books. I think it's phenomenal, but it touches on all that, and just thought that might be relevant.
It's interesting, Sean, because when Sensei Mustard was on this call, he talked about the one time he got super irritated was when a Japanese person on a subway said, "You'll never understand Budo the way that a Japanese person." So that's like a very contradictory, like that's the contrast of what we're talking about right now, right? So there.
Yeah. Gage-Sensei, I just want to ask you one of our guest questions, and then I'm afraid we're ticking toward our inevitable end, and I feel like we just got started. But from Justin Shea, can you recount the events and experiences leading up to the point when Sato named you as his successor? And did you know it was coming, or was it a surprise? Thanks, Justin. I'm excited to hear this answer.
It took 28 years. And to spend 28 years virtually without break, moving towards a goal is in no way, I think, a negative thing. I think it's a positive thing. But it's difficult to have a whole bunch of excitement for 28 years. in the sense of exuberance, motivation, and continued dedication and striving and all of that. That it makes sense. But I just simply can't be exuberant for 28 years.
No.
And Sato Sensei, about a year before he passed away, made certain significant changes to the structure of the organization he worked for, IMAF. And he said, you will be the technical director of this art, but I will not name you as Soke or something like that, the inheritor, because the art is not owned by one person. So I would say that my position is not, what would you say, as the owner or some sort of person who inherits it. It's rather the chief technical director.
Mm-hmm.
And was I thrilled? It's a great honor, and I appreciate the recognition, but no, I wasn't thrilled. It's just my job. I love it. I love training. I love the system. I believe in it, but it's not about me. It's about what this does for others and how I can facilitate that.
And then our last question from our panel of people watching, from Christopher Anderson. You mentioned that both Judo and Aikido are incomplete. Would you consider Aikido to be more of a finishing school, something that complements and completes Judo or Karate? So,
wow, that's a great image. Thank you. Let me. Personal bias is hard to get around. I think everyone should do Judo first. It's just the best way to build up your body and to learn to compete safely. That's my personal opinion. Let me give you a little background story here. Wado Ryu Karate is one of the top 5 in Japan, and it's primarily in Eastern Japan, the Tokyo area. And it was founded by Otsuka Sensei the First. And then his son was someone that I knew and trained with. And the 3rd generation, the grandson, is now the head. And when they all take the name Otsuka Hinori, and when the previous Otsuka Hinori passes away, the next guy gets this name. So, generation number 2, Otsuka Sensei, has a son. And the son says, Dad, I want to go to the dojo. I want to learn karate. And Dad says, no. You have to go to the dojo and learn judo. And this young man practiced judo until he was 21 or 22, so that he would learn basics properly. And when he graduated from university, his father said, okay, now you may come to the dojo and learn Wado Ryu Karate. I'm not saying that's the only way to do it. I'm not saying it's the best way to do it, but that is an approach that makes sense on one level, because as kids, particularly as children, you can really compete in judo safely. If you're coached well and people are doing the right thing. You can also do it unsafely, but you compete with your full power safely. People don't get hurt. You build up your strength. And then at some point, once you've got those basics down, moving into another art, your fundamentals will be better. And so, yes, maybe that applies to Aikido. And finally, the first generation of Aikido people, there was Ueshiba Morihei, and then Tomiki, and all these other people. They were all judo players. Every last one of the famous Aikido people started with judo. They got 3rd or 4th dan, and then they said, hey, that Aikido stuff looks cool. There were no people who started with 0 background in Aikido in the first generation. So take from that what you will.
So we are on the home stretch, but I do want to feather this question in, and I would actually love to hear every sensei's opinion. So you've mentioned competition a number of times. And so often when we talk in the classical martial arts, we can talk about, you know, tournament only fighters or McDojos where they're doing touch fighting, but there's no value to the actual contact. But you're stressing competition. So I'd love if each person can comment on how important competition is to developing a fully rounded martial artist. Why don't we start with you, Sensei Dauphin, Sensei Suino, Sensei Legacy, and finish with you, Sensei Gage?
It's a tough question, Sean. I mean, the answer to what competition gives you as a martial artist and does it make you complete or not? I have a really hard time answering that because I came out the other side of it, right? And I've seen lots of people who never competed. So I guess when you say competition, my mind thinks of structured competition, right? Like going to a tournament. I think, you know, that makes you be brave. It's hard to get on an airplane and fly to another country when you know there's going to be a person there that you don't know that wants something that you want to, and you're going to have to compete against them. So that definitely would give you something. But I think the most important competition is the competition that you have in the dojo, right? With people, new people who come and people who are already there. And the competition is, I guess that competition is safer. Like maybe it's safer. I don't know, maybe it's not. It's a really good question. I have a lot of contradicting thoughts in my mind about what the benefit of competition is. And are you complete if you don't compete or not? It could be art to art even. Like, you know, how many Iaidoka, I've competed in Iaido. I have competed in Iaido, and Sensei Suino has competed in Iaido. But outside of Sensei Suino and I, how many people in our associations have actually competed in Iaido? I don't. So are they lesser? Like I know people who've not competed before that are way better in Iaido than me. But I also think that you do definitely get something from competing. So I don't know. I'm going to have to think about that one a little bit. I don't want to give a definitive answer on that.
Thanks,
Maybe
Sensei.
Sensei Legacy or somebody else with more experience will give a better definitive answer than me.
I was writing some notes when the question came out. I'm sorry if you could mention it really quickly. Was it
Yes.
about
Just Sensei Gage was talking about competition and how important that was to building some fundaments. And I was asking each of you how important competition is to building a complete martial artist.
in my opinion, it is important because it allows you to recognize how you react under times of not knowing what's happening. It's like Randy said, somebody else is there to knock you out, okay, in a competition. Just use that for instance. And how you react under pressure, what your expanse will be, how calm you can remain, what techniques to use at what time. There's so much more. I truly believe that competition, this is a warring art. Some people, we don't do that nowadays, but even in days today, the Army practices war. The US Army and all the Marines, they practice warring today during peacetime. So warriors do that. You don't have to hurt someone else, but you have to become your best or your life ends very shortly in the old days of Japan and Okinawa.
Thanks, Sensei.
Yes.
Sensei Suino?
Yeah, I agree. I think you need pressure. I think you need to be pressure tested. There's lots of different ways to do that. And I think that the more extreme the pressure is doled out over time, advancing in levels, short of disastrous injury or death, the better. So whether you do Iaido and you compete against other people in forums, or you do Boken fencing and get whacked on the head with a wooden sword, whether you do BJJ and you get choked out, whether you do karate and you get punched in the face, whether you get judo or thrown, I think you should do as much of it as you can, not exclusively, because I believe technical training and kata are very important, but I think pressure is critical. I think it forms you as a human being. It's part of the crucible process that creates diamonds out of human beings.
Love that. And I love that you qualified disastrous injury. Like that's the only level at which we pull back. I love that. Gage-Sensei, do you want to put a button on any of that or expand?
Well, I find the discussion is fascinating, and I have agreement with everyone. I think that the mechanism that works so well in judo is that they have a system where you can spar all the time and nobody gets hurt. There are no broken noses, what have you. Sure, injuries occur. Most of the time when injuries occur, well, not most of the time. Often injuries occur because there's poor coaching and bad habits. All the techniques of judo are designed to be done safely. And outside of the occasional, mishap, you should be able to train really hard all the time. What that allows you to do is to hone your technique, to hone your mind, to remain calm, to get your timing, and to learn defense in a more real way. It's not one person is going to wait, the other person attacks. That's a great training tool, but it sets you up for failure. Both people have to be attacking. That's the most dangerous situation. And that's what you have to develop. And you can do that through judo. The downside, of course, judo has rules. You can't hit someone with your elbow and all those other good things. But that basic training for a few years for kids up until whatever age, I just think is tremendously helpful for all the reasons that you gentlemen discussed.
Right on. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate taking that in. And I'm watching as a student when I hear this because, my senseis know how much time I've spent fighting. And it was actually right before COVID hit that Sensei Dauphin said to me, Ben's, the next best thing for your fighting, believe it or not, is compete, just tournaments. Like it's going to hone you, sharpen you, speed you up. And it was really cool. And I look forward to picking that up again and taking in a lot of what you've said when we can do that.
Great.
Yeah. And I sadly have to now take us out, Gage-Sensei. The way we do this is we do what I call round the horn. So starting with Hanshi Legacy, we're just going to go around and share some of our thoughts with our time with you today. You'll get the last word, and then we'll do some housekeeping to take us home. Sensei Legacy?
Well, John, I find that your training shows in your personality. You have a calm, clear mind, and that's a product of a good martial artist. I also appreciate your understanding of the position that we are servants. We're not there for ourselves, but we're there to serve others by way of representing our arts. We're not movie stars, but we must be on a path today because we are the ones that are passing it on. And it's like a vocation. Now, people think, hey, you have a 10th Dan, we're not superstars or anything. That makes me worry a little bit more because I have to complete someone else's up to a 9th Dan to fulfill their potential. And that's a big burden. When I tell people that, when they say, hey, when the sensei told me that I was going to do this, I started to feel a little bit of pressure. I'm more used to it now, but I was a bit worried whether I could really fulfill that. And I see that you have. I appreciate meeting you, and I hope that when this is all over, that we can be face to face.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Hanshi. Sensei Suino?
Well, I could talk for a long time. This turned out to be a more serious discussion than I anticipated, and that's wonderful. It's part of the history building that we're doing on this show. And so this is a record of some of Gage-Sensei's thoughts and the rest of our thoughts on martial arts. I think as we contribute to history, it's wonderful. I want to just remind everybody that along the way, there's been a ton of fun. All of us on this call have had a ton of fun, and Gage-Sensei and I had many great days and great evenings in the dojo, sweating and laughing, and at the after party, sweating and laughing. We just had a ton of fun together over the years. And let's not forget that a life in the martial arts is a life well spent.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Sensei Suino. What a great reminder. Sensei Dauphin?
Well, Sensei Gage, I'm going to put my glasses on because, like Sensei Legacy, I write notes while we're doing this so that I can prove to you that I was listening to what you were saying and that I've taken something away from your teaching. One thing I don't think, maybe you didn't know this about me, but I also have a degree in history. That's what I went to university for. And primarily I studied in my electives Japanese history. And I never heard it expressed that way, that it's such a comprehensive and linear history. I really like that. Like that's, I don't want to say that that makes it easier to learn, but yeah, it's a daunting task to think of some of the other Asian histories and trying to dig into them when they're changing names as they get older and doing various things. So I liked hearing you say that. I'm taking something away from that for sure. I like that you said something that we have all said, which is that when you went to the dojo, you got some stability and camaraderie in a safe place where you could benefit from that and grow and learn. That's something we all can relate to. I like that image of you as an American immigrant in Japan with some money in your pocket and not really sure where you're going to go. And I also like the image of you having to go to a warrior event with two sumo battling each other, which is on my bucket list to see. And after seeing that, saying, I can do this. Like that's, I'm going to hold that image in my mind. I'll probably think of that almost every time I look at you now. It was very interesting to hear your comments about Sato Sensei. I feel like I know him a little more dimensionally now than maybe I did before we had this conversation, which I think is a great service that you did for your sensei. But it also reminded me of Sensei Guest, Monty Guest. I was thinking of him where he said when he went to the dojo the first time, he was asked to sit for a number of classes until the end of the class where he was asked to come out on the floor and clean before he was allowed to come into the dojo and become a member of the dojo. I'm really happy that you were with Sensei Sato at the end of his life. That you were there through big portions of his life and you were there at the end of his life. That's also a great image. I liked your comments about historical training versus the evolved training and how things happened in the past that don't happen today, but things are happening today because we're standing kind of on the shoulders of those people in the past and we've learned from them. And that's why we can change things. You said about a mountain of gold, that you don't have a need for a mountain of gold. And it made me think of a question that I often ask, which is, how much is enough for you? And why do you want more than what is enough? Right? Why do you want more than what is enough? I'm going to say the funny one. Just recently you said it does all these things and you can't do the good stuff like hit him with an elbow. I like that. And one of the last things that I relate to that you said is that at this point in your life, it wasn't the excitement of inheriting something, it was your job. It's your job, and it's your job to take that thing and use it to help other people. And I think that's the thing. And I'm really happy to have learned all these lessons from you, Sensei Gage. And thanks so much for coming on tonight and sharing all this stuff.
It was my pleasure, and thank you. I'd like to close just very briefly with the idea that this has been an absolute honor and a pleasure to share these thoughts and hear your ideas to further build our camaraderie and shared experience. I think it's tremendously valuable, and I admire what you guys have been doing. I can't thank you enough for having me on. Finally, we did talk about this point, the tenets of judo, of mutual benefit and welfare. This is being demonstrated right now. In the middle of this community, this is exactly what we're doing. We're finding ways to help each other And through doing that, we help ourselves. And I think that's just a wonderful way to end what has been a pleasure and an honor to participate in. Thank you all very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to throw it to Sensei Dauphin to chat about next week, and then I'll do a little bit of housekeeping on the way out, everybody.
Yeah, so next week is going to be the host chat, but it's going to be a host chat with a bit of a spin, and we're back to our regular time. So back to 8 o'clock, but sorry, 8:30, right? 8:30. Back to 8:30. We sign on at 8 o'clock and we laugh and joke, and then at 8:30 we let everybody else in.
We get serious again.
But our host chat next week is going to be a little bit of a spin because, as you know, Punch Kick Choke Chat, Legacy Shorin-ryu, Tarian Jiu-Jitsu, World Kabuto, Hanshi Tarian, Hanshi Sai, we're all working together to do this, what we've coined World Martial Arts Live. And it's exactly what Sensei Gage was talking about, right? It's a unique opportunity to keep our market alive, to connect people that might not have ever been connected before. It's an opportunity for somebody in Kitchener to train with somebody in Japan, even if it be for 45 minutes, right? It's an opportunity for people to train for 24 hours straight in different arts that they've never been around across all disciplines, maybe judo, maybe eskrima, maybe Thai boxing. And we have very prominent teachers that are signing in to help with this event and teach. All the people, for instance, on Punch Kick Choke Chat will be teaching at that event. So, and it's really just about that, like keeping those connections together, keeping our industry alive, providing some opportunities that might not be there for people who would never get them, and also providing opportunities for people to get together and see people that they haven't been able to see for a while and train and interact with them. So next week at the host chat, we're going to have a number of the different instructors come on. And it's interesting when you think about that, Sean, these people that are going to come on, I'm not going to mention the names right now because I'd like to build a little suspense, but you know, we have people from Sweden, Belgium, Australia, England, who have all agreed to come on and chat with us about why they want to do World Martial Arts Live. Mm-hmm. Why would they want to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning? Because that's what they're going to do. They're going to get up at like 2 a.m. to talk to us for 10 or 15 minutes about why they think this event is important and why they think people should do it. And yeah, that's what's happening next week. I'm stoked about it. I can't wait to talk to these people and see these people. And I can't wait to do this event. And I can't wait to meet new people and train in different things. I can't wait to see Sensei Suino and Sensei Legacy shine, doing the things that they're great at doing and the world being exposed to that. And I can't wait to see new people who haven't had that chance, like you and Robert and other people, get a chance to get out there and show what they're made of too. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be a great 24 hours in martial arts history.
Thanks, Sensei. That's exciting. And I'm already excited, but that just amped it up for real. And also for our host chat next week. Like, it's such a privilege. And I do want to say, you know, based on this show, I forgot to do this last week. And I just want to give huge thanks to the people who make this show happen. Because without Robert Shlumsky, Mike Russell, Victoria Feth, Justin Shea, Alden Adair, and Andrei Sedashev, there is no show, because they're running the behind the scenes. They're helping with the promotions. And some weeks I do forget, and I always apologize because it's an oversight on my part and I take full responsibility. We need those people and we're grateful for them. Also, this is Don Warner from WarnerEntertainment.com, WARRENER. We encourage you to check out WarnerEntertainment.com for your free copy of Warriors Magazine today. Over 2,500 items, including books, DVDs, downloads, rare posters, lots more, featuring some of the biggest names in the martial arts, like Shotokan's Hidekazu Kanazawa, Goju Ryu's Chuck Merriman, Ninja Stephen Hayes, legendary Joe Louis. That's just the beginning. So go to WarnerEntertainment.com. And I love that he says this. Thanks for listening and keep smiling. You know, he wrote that copy and he's thanking you for listening to our show. His ad as well, but for being with us and keep smiling. Indeed, it's an interesting time. Gage-Sensei, I just wanted to add one thing that I loved. You said personal bias is hard to get around, and I wrote that down. I love that with all your opinions, which you gave so clearly and so fully and so from your mastery, you understood that, but this is my opinion. And I thought that was so cool. It let you give your opinion so freely. And I wrote that down because I'm like, the more I can accept my personal bias isn't necessarily right, the more I can actually put forth what I believe to be true, and maybe it'll have some value. So I really took that from you tonight, in addition to everything everybody else said. To everybody watching, thank you so much for being here. We'll see you next week at a regular time. Stay safe. Thanks for
Great.
coming.
Thank you. Thank you
Rock and
very
roll.
much.
Thanks, everybody.
everybody.